Hello everyone, I'm in the RV trying to figure out two problems that have been really annoying during my trip to the Arctic Circle. Number one, the dust problem. On heavy, dusty logging roads or gravel roads, there is a lot of dust that comes into the cabin. It comes really into the cabinets on the bottom part of the RV, the bottom cabinets, but the amount of dust that comes in is ridiculous, and it was an absolute nightmare to the point that we had to stop a couple of times and clean up because even the smoke alarm went off, so much dust was coming in. And I figured it out. I'll show you guys. And the other problem is the bolts, wood screws that get loose. That's a common problem. There aren't a lot of solutions for that unless you can do more, let's say, invasive practices, and I'll show you what I mean with that in a second. I was just putting back the stove and I decided to make this video because this is a problem that is common. These both problems are really common in RVs, that you get dust when you go off-road or in gravel roads and that things get loose. And it's because these things are really not built for such a hard journey, right? They are mostly built for smooth roads, for highway roads. So the Arctic Circle was about 2,000 kilometers of gravel roads, and it was quite the test for this vehicle. Overall, it did great, but when I go into the details of how they built these things, you can understand why they are not really thought for that kind of hard environment. Although you can make upgrades easy enough to do to sort of like make them up to the task. All right, here you can see I have the light on because it's pretty dark in here today. So this is my stove, okay? So this is a stove that has also an oven on the bottom there. But the stove has essentially these four bolts, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that get loose. And it starts wobbling all over the place like this way. And then as if you can see here, there is damage on the wood because the metal frame is basically scratching it as we go on bumpy roads. So the first thing is that you want to make these screws um, tight and solid, and I put wood glue in there as well so that in theory they harden a little bit more inside the cabinet and they don't loosen up so easily. Now, the more invasive procedure I was talking about can be done in some instances, but not easily in others. So, for example, here, instead of using a wood screw, I would drill a hole that goes through the cabinet, since I can access from behind here, and I would put a nut in there and a lock washer so that this thing is never gonna move again. Now in this case there was enough grab on the wood that I didn't do it. I didn't need to do it. The hole was not stripped. Sometimes the hole gets stripped if the wood is MDF or some crappy wood, which is a lot of times the case. But in this case there was enough grip, so I just tightened them with the wood screw. But I'll show you another example of this. Here there is my cabinet. There's a bit of a mess here everywhere because I'm doing this stuff. So here you can see there is these two bolts here and two bolts here on the cabinet door. Very simple. Now this got all mangled. The holes here got all mangled. The screws would not bite into the wood anymore, and the wood was all stripped because this is MDF crap. So with vibrations, inevitably it starts unbolting, and then you bolt it back in, and then you unbolt it again, and then eventually it gets stripped. Really, you can do that only a couple of times. So instead, I drilled a hole here, used machine screws, and bolted the whole thing through, and this is never gonna move ever again. Now it's hard to show you here, but you have a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. So most things are done this way. Now the next thing that was making a lot of noise is that part where the bed is just under the headliner. Is just an absolute nightmare. Now that's where the cab basically connects with the top of the camper, and there is a bunch of wood screws there that apparently get loose as well. How do you know that the wood screws are loose? Because it's a whining sort of noise. So it's like sort of thing, just to make you understand. And that's because the screw tends to go up and down, so there is some movement and there is some friction between different materials, right? Like in this case on the stove, there is a metal piece there, and that's the same thing for the bed or the cab connection, let's say, because there is an aluminum frame holding that. The other way of fixing that is that you can use a riv nut if you have the opportunity to use metal, because riv nuts mostly work with metal, and essentially they clamp the sheet of metal and you can then screw things on them, and they're pretty strong, like really strong if done properly. And another solution could be to have inserts for wood. Why didn't they do that? Because that costs a little bit more money, a little bit more time, right? You have to screw the hole, you have to make sure it's centered, you have to make it precise and make sure that there is no movement, otherwise the insert is gonna start spinning. And then there is machine screw that costs more. So all these things add up, and really you need to start doing it by yourself where it's needed if you don't want this thing to essentially collapse. All right, so that's how you can fix your loose bolts. Now let me show you a little bit what I'm doing to fix the noise on the cab, where the actual camper holds onto the cab. This is after a couple of trips to Home Depot, because I didn't have everything I needed, and also because I needed the longer screws than I thought, and so I had to go a couple of times. So here you can see this is where the bed lies, right? There is this space that you can take out if you want and just have one person sleep there. I had to remove a bunch of stuff here. I had to remove the A-pillars, I have to remove the liner that is under the cab, the sun visors, and then you have access essentially to the structure of the ceiling of the cab, of the roof essentially. And here you can see there is a bunch of holes. One set of holes holds this rubber sort of like cover that they have to avoid showing this garbage, and another set of screws, which are these ones, holds the liner itself. Now let me show you. These are the screws that are used to hold the liner, so they are self-tapping automotive screws. So these go into the aluminum frame, so they grab nice, and usually they are pretty strong, they don't get loose that easily. And then they had these screws here, these ones, that went basically from the bottom up, just like that, to hold this old structure in place. Now these screws were loose, not all of them, but a few of them were loose. So instead, what I've done is to use these bolts that have a round head. They go through the sandwich, so they go through the whole frame, and they are bolted in with lock nuts right there. Okay, so this is not gonna move anymore. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like, these are the bolts. You can see the head here. So these are stainless steel. This is not the exact bolt because they didn't have the 2 inches length of those, so I'm using this, which is a Robertson bolt, 2 inches, very simple. And then I'm using the washers, number 10. Those are 10, 30-second. And then I've taken a bunch of 3/16 washers, which are actually wider. And I always do that when I build something, when I build my vehicles. So look at this, look how wide this is, but it fits perfectly in the number 10 bolt. And so when you see from the bottom up, you can see here how much grip this has, right? On the top is no need, but on the bottom I thought it would be better, so that there is a secure grip and the surface that is actually grabbing is a little bit wider. In any case, this was loose, so these bolts were loose, and so you get all this whining noise that is absolutely a nightmare.